And of course, segments 1 and 2, we teach free monthly webinar classes. If you are not a part of segment 2 and you'd like to have a free sample class to download, send us an email. We would be happy to show you what segment 2 classes are like. Here's our listing of all the classes we've done through the year. It was in January of 2014 that I switched segment 1 classes over to the webinar format after 10 or 11 years of doing audio classes. And of course, all of those old classes, audio and webinar, are archived in the segment 1 registered students area of our website. Class next month is going to be on the different house systems. So again, here is our title for this month, and as we move right into it, and I was prepping for class, I realized there were a few other subjects I was going to include in forecasting. For instance, I thought I'd start with solar returns. You might be familiar with this. Solar is sun. Return is the return of the sun, and that means our birthday. And what solar returns really are is a snapshot of the planetary transits at the time of our solar return or birthday. So if you do cast a solar return chart, it will be a secondary vibration of the planetary method, what we know as Pluto and the nodes. You'll have a secondary vibration of that in the solar return chart, and I'll show you an example of this. When you draw up a solar return chart, you want to look for vibrations of the solar return chart angles, because from year to year that solar return ascendant will change, just like the descendant, midheaven, nadir. I like to pay attention to the moon sign and house and its aspects from year to year, because that's going to give a secondary vibration of our emotional flavors, so to speak. And then, of course, look for any current planetary trends. And what do we have going on right now? We have Pluto square the nodes. We have Mars square the nodes. We have Uranus conjunct the south node. That's showing up in everybody's solar return charts as we are heading into this fall and the beginning of next year. Something else that I always include vibrationally when I draw up solar return charts is I look to see what the numerological year is on a personal basis. Now, those personal years go from 1 through 9, and then they start over again. Sometimes in the field of numerology, numerologists will change on January 1st. I have found that almost all astrologers change that vibration of the personal year on the birthday. And so, for instance, let me show you an example here. Here's a chart of a female, and if you can't see this, the birth date is November 27th, 1963, 3:15 a.m. in Rapid City, South Dakota. And I'll show you the birth data on the next slide for the solar return, or the data for the solar return chart, excuse me. But what you see here on your left side is the natal chart of this person, and here is their solar return chart drawn up for 2014. And so to find out what personal year they're in, you take the birth date and day, in this case November 27th, and you add that up. And so we are looking at November, which is 1-1. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus the 2 of 27 is 4. So 4 plus the 7 is 11. You reduce that down. Again, 11 plus 27 equals 11. You can add it up multiple ways, but you reduce that down to a 2. And this is a 7 year. And so 2 plus 7, this solar return chart, this person is starting a 9-year with numerology. So one more time, just very quickly. November is 11. 11th month of the year. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus the 2 and 27 is 4. 4 plus 7 is 11. So that 11 reduces down to a 2. And 2014 reduces down to a 7-year universally for everybody. But for this person here, 2 plus 7, they are starting a 9-year. In other words, they are finishing up a 9-year in the personal years of numerology. Next year, they will start over again in a 1-year. Briefly, just a little bit for you. If you look at this chart, look at the natal chart's 11th house Pluto Aquarius Soul. Their solar return chart is 11th house Pluto Aquarius Soul. So that secondary vibration is going to be in tune with the natal chart. You see that they have an Aquarius rising this year. And if you look at that natal chart, 20 degrees Libra, 21 degrees Aquarius, there's a very nice trine between the ascendants of the natal and solar return ascendant charts. This year, though, look at here, Moon at 2948 Capricorn, and it's new phase to that Mars, which is new phase to that Pluto. So I would right off the bat look at this person being in a 9-year numerology and having this Moon in Capricorn as really being much more emotionally practical, serious, deeper. It's new phase to the soul, both Mars and Pluto. Mars conscious desire, Pluto unconscious desire. So this soul is really initiating some deeper beginnings on emotional levels. Refer this back to the natal chart. We're going to use this chart all the way through, so I'm not going to do in-depth interpretation on this. Just going to teach you some little tidbits and highlights, all right? Anytime you have questions, you're welcome to type them into your Q&A mode. Leroy will answer the question. As he knows, he'll interrupt me when it's something we need to discuss. So by all means, you can bring your questions. I'll also pause at every different type of forecasting that I'm working with. But if you look at this chart here with this Aquarian soul, we'll get into this in the transits, but you see that we have Jupiter and the Moon square the nodes in this chart. And when I move into transits, I'll explain a little bit more background on this chart for you. But we have a feisty Aries Moon with Jupiter there. This is a female who is so emotionally over the top sometimes, excitable. Everything is just over the top, expanded with that Moon-Jupiter conjunction. Look at how the solar return moon now in Capricorn, in that 12th house. Again, there's going to be a lot more emotional practicality and deep inward searching that will tone down a lot of this feisty Aries moon right here. And of course, what do you see going on? Here's the current transits. This is what a solar return chart is. I also see this Jupiter right over here on the descendant is bringing a lot of new growth and new beginnings in the whole world of relationships. How this person approaches relationships, how they work with relationships. Now, I'm not going to take the full hour to go, or full 2 hours to go through this chart. My whole purpose in forecasting here is to give you some highlights of how to work with things. So whenever I have anybody who calls me up and says, I want to have a solar return reading, Kim Marie, yes, I draw up the solar return chart, and I kind of look at these things that I pointed out right here. But by all means, I still include the transits around the natal chart. I still include progressions and solar arcs. I include all of the above when somebody comes to me for forecasting. And so again, here's the 2 separate charts. And then when you do a bi-wheel, this is the inner chart on the inner wheel, the 11th house Pluto at South Node in Cap, North Node Cancer, and then here's the solar return around it. And so this is exactly a snapshot of the transits on this person's solar return, which will be coming the day before their birthday, their actual birthday, because a solar return is, of course, when the transiting sun is exactly by degree and minute back to the spot it was when this person is born. So a solar return chart can fall the day before, the day of, or the day after your birthday. And as a matter of fact, right now, most solar return charts are falling the day before or the day of. Once we have leap year, February 29th in 2016, then solar return charts will fall the day after the birthday, most likely, or the tail end of the exact birthday. And so sometimes new people to astrology get confused because, wait a minute, my birthday's November 22nd, 7th, excuse me, for this chart example. But again, solar returns can fall day before, day of, or day after. And that is due to the leap year that we add every 4 years to keep all our calendars and clocks and astronomical timing all the same. And so there's several things going on, with this chart. And when you start to look at the transits, you can see Pluto here, you can see Uranus here. Let me move forward before I say any more, though, on this chart, and just say a couple of things about transits, all right? First of all, for many astrologers, forecasting is a preferred word over prediction. Prediction, just to me, is so black and white, and it takes all the life out of looking forward. There are those who prefer the word prediction, but for most of us in evolutionary astrology, I think we would use the term forecasting, which means we can tell there's a planetary trend coming up. We can probably tell subject matter by that planet. We can have timing by how fast or slow it moves. But how it will actually turn out is going to be so related to the choices that any individual makes. Anything can be used or abused, so we all have that free choice, so to speak. And that's why when you're working with forecasting, I like to give the spectrum of example and then refer the client to their own choices as to how they want things to take place. Now, transits are the current planetary movements in the sky and how it relates back to the natal chart by those angular relationships that we call aspects. We can include phases in here as well. And of course, we've just come off a 5-month series of segment 1 classes on the cycle of phases and aspects, and I refer you to those to review if you want more detail on specific aspects. When you're working with transits, all the planets are valid. Typically, however, I tend to use Jupiter through Pluto transits, including Chiron, and I use a 3-year time span. I'll show you some more on that and what we call hit lists later on in this class. But when I have somebody who comes in and they just want a forecasting reading, I don't typically draw up the transits of the inner planets. I only do that if I have a client who says, Kim, I specifically want to look at the next month, or I want to look at the next 3 months. I got a lot of travel coming up here, and I just want to see what's going on in my chart over the short term. If they want a shorter outlook or forecasting time period, then by all means I include the inner planets. And I many times like to include Sun and Mars when people want timing. Just tracking the Sun around the chart, it's something that repeats itself every year. In other words, you'll have the Sun cross over your ascendant, descendant. 10th house cusp, 4th house cusp, within 1 or 2 days of each other every single year. For me, I always have the sun cross over my 21-degree Capricorn ascendant every year, January 13th, 14th, right around there. Every year, July 13th, 14th, I have the sun crossing into my 7th house, going over my descendant. And I just have learned how to time those all the time, every year. I can just tell you when that vibration's going on. As a matter of fact, last week, I had the sun cross over my midheaven, and I don't know that day quite as well. I want to say November 4th or 5th of every year, sun crosses over my midheaven at 1345 Scorpio. So you can learn that timing. With Mars, it's more of a cycle every 2 years, and every time you're going to have one of those 2-year cycles, you are looking at a Mars retrograde too. And when you have that Mars retrograde every other year, you have Mars 7 or 8 months in one house. Now, we don't have any Mars retrogrades coming up in 2015. We had one last year. If you're wanting more specifics, for instance, say Mars retrograde or any other planetary retrograde, we have classes that are publicly available under our forecasting webinar page, and all of those eventually make it into section 3 of our astral library as well. So I refer you there if you want more details. I also will look at Mercury retrogrades too, because we have 3 or 4 of those a year. And if somebody comes to me, I have clients that get a 6-month checkup. I have clients that get an annual checkup. They don't pay any attention to their birthday. We all have clients that'll come to us at the beginning of the year in January to see how the year is going to go. So again, I will vary what planets I use with transits depending upon how long of a time span I'm looking for. And if the client does not specify, I look 3 years. I will look at the moon transits to track emotional evolution. Now, because the moon moves through a sign of the zodiac every 2.5 days, because the moon goes around your chart once every month, I rarely include transiting moon in forecasting. How I tell people, and especially students and beginning students, to work with the transits of the moon is to just observe them for yourself. One of the things that Leroy and I are always doing, every so often we're going, where's the moon? Where's the moon? Because I lose track of it, and I can just tell when that moon goes in fire and air signs, and I'm looking at my chart because at the calendar because I'm thinking it was last week, Monday or Tuesday, when the moon was in Aries, and oh my gosh, you could just tell it. Everybody was calling, everybody wanted everything done. You could just feel the feisty energy of that Aries moon. So again, if you want to observe those 12 archetypes, especially on emotional levels, just track the moon a month or two, or all the time if you want. Track it around your chart, or just follow the moon through its signs and observe how everybody around you operates emotionally according to whatever flavor the moon is at the moment. Now, of course, with transits we have planetary retrogrades, and when that happens, there can be various aspects that the transiting planet will make to the natal chart, and typically 3 times each: direct, retrograde, direct again. More details, I refer you to my public classes on planetary retrogrades. When we are working with Neptune and Pluto, though, it is possible to have 5 aspects each over a 2-year period, because these planets are so far away from the sun. and they move so slowly through the chart. They can actually make a certain aspect 5 times. With the case of Chiron, it has such an elliptical orbit that it too can make 5 aspects. I've never really seen Chiron make 7, although when Chiron starts interacting with the outer planets, you can have dozens of aspects going on between transiting planet to transiting planet in the sky. Now, I'm just looking at this class as an overview of the different forecasting methods. If any of you would like to see a possible class in more detail of something, you can let me know. Again, I cover a lot of that in the public classes, but if there's something that you want us to explore in a more detailed manner, by all means, send me an email, let me know, and we can definitely consider that. So this is the highlights of what I look at with transits. Now here we are, back to this female chart. This is a client that I've had for many, many years. She is second individuated. We, in our last reading, we're talking about her transitioning towards that third individuated with these major transits that she has going on in her chart with the Uranus-Pluto squares that you see right here taking place. I've said the changes that this has brought into your life right now is giving you some opportunity to really make some evolutionary leaps of growth in your life. Now, this person has been a South Dakota resident all her life. She has never been married. As you can see with this Pluto transit over her south node, Pluto squaring Jupiter and squaring the moon next year 3 times. Everything's only been 3 times with Pluto, thank goodness. Uranus here has been squaring the nodes natally as it's been going over Jupiter, and then as it goes over the moon 3 times as well next year. What has happened for this person, and she was raised with consensus religion of the Mennonite Hutterite factor, if you're familiar with that. Her family broke away from it a few generations ago, but her parents were still pretty observant of a lot of that. Her second stage individuated with that moon Jupiter square the nodes and an Aquarian soul with Uranus there in that conjunction. She was really pretty rebellious of all of this and broke free, and has really been an avid searcher of breaking free from consensus beliefs, moving through a lot of New Age. She was Wiccan for a long time and probably falls to the Wiccan standards more than anything. Again, has had a couple of relationships, but nothing in the last 10 to 15 years. What happened with this right here is a health crisis. She ended up through a series of doctoring, losing over 80% of the use of her muscles to the point where she could barely walk, was almost wheelchair bound. As a matter of fact, she's become fully disabled in the last 2 years. Now, through various doctoring and through alternative work, she used to be on my energetic balancing program, and then through various reasons couldn't afford it anymore, especially going through the health crises. She had went off my energetic balancing before the health crises. But anyway, she ended up becoming fully disabled, and luckily through doctoring, she's got 50% of her muscle movement back now. Muscle myopathy, I think it's called. And so she's slowly mobile right now. And they don't know if she can get all her muscle use back or not. The other thing that has been happening for her is she's been losing family members. She lost her mother 1 year ago, and she lost her sister on, she lost her sister last week. She called me and said, I think I need a session. And one morning last week, she called me back that same afternoon and said, my sister just passed away. Now, this wasn't unexpected. They knew the sister was having health issues as well. However, it was a shock to this woman, this female chart in question, because her sister was a major financial supporter to her. Because in the United States, being disabled doesn't mean you can make ends meet. Trying to get public housing. So there's been a lot of major events happening in her life. And what we really worked with these transits here right now is all of this issues from the past of what she's had to be so controlling, South Node here in the third, and just, almost feeling like she, with this moon square the nodes, just hyper reacting to everything. And so we talked about how Pluto has just come through and has been demanding that she surrenders outer control and really works for that inner security, as I call it. And in the same respect, Uranus over here has really been waking her up on emotional levels. And interestingly enough, and of course you see the nodal axis getting ready to come into this picture, so there's more to go on and there's more to the story of things that are taking place here with the father who's left and two brothers that are left now. I won't go into all the details for privacy reasons, but she's really going through some emotional maturity. And when her sister crossed over, and she called me last week, that afternoon, this was before our appointment, I said, you've got 3 days. Talk to your sister. So important when somebody crosses over. They're right here. Talk to her. Work with her. Whatever you want to say to her, however you can help her heal. And so she did a couple of meditations. And she said, excuse me, I may need to take a drink. And this female, being an Aquarian soul, sometimes gets a lot of these future-orientated messages, that psychic awareness that comes on a mental basis with this Uranus-Pluto here. But anyway, she did a meditation and she said, my sister came to me very clearly and said, it's time to grow up, honey. And she thought, oh, there's the real message. And so this is some of the biggest thing that's going on for her right here with this, these transits from Uranus and Pluto, etc. And Roy, honey, I may have to ask you, could you deliver me a cough drop? And
Yes.
It'll soothe my dryness of my throat. Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
Ponder a question that came in from the board while I do that,
Yes.
Kim.
Yes.
Obviously, this lady's going to have her solar return coming up.
Yep.
Just clarify for the group that solar return chart is drawn up with the current location of residence.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Now, there's two frames of thought here in solar return charts. There are the astrologers who will always cast the solar return chart for the natal spot where somebody is born. It just so happens this female was born in Rapid City, South Dakota, and she lives in Rapid City, South Dakota. I follow the school of thought with astrologers where I will draw up the solar return in the current year for wherever somebody currently resides or where they currently are on their birthday. For instance, 1 year, Leroy and I, back in the heyday of our travel days, Leroy had his solar return in Victoria, British Columbia, and I had my solar return in Toronto, Ontario. We just happened to have been traveling a lot that year with our other work. And so there are also those from the school of thought whereby they'll choose to travel on their solar return to change the ascendant, to get planets out of various houses. For instance, here's the actual solar return of this female. If somebody wanted to, let me get my astrocartography straight here. If somebody wanted to move the 11th house Pluto into the 10th house for career reasons over the next year, they would travel east from Rapid City or the location of the solar return chart. If they would want to move Pluto into the 12th house, they'd travel further west. However, chances are they'd have to go on a sailboat in the Pacific Ocean to get that Pluto into the 12th house from Rapid City. Maybe it'd be there along the west coast. So the point is that there are those who will actually move around planet Earth on their solar return to change the chart. What you will not change is the planetary configurations that are taking place. So everybody who's having solar returns, September, October, November, December, January, February, even into March, we're all going to have Uranus within orb of a conjunction to the south node. We're going to have Pluto in orb of squaring the nodes. You're not going to get away from that configuration. You'll just move it around the chart. And to recap, most astrologers do cast the solar return chart for wherever you're currently going to be on that birthday or that solar return. And when I have clients call me and say, I need a solar return chart, Kim Marie, or reading, I say, where are you going to be the day before, the day of, and the day after your birthday? And I have one client who travels, their birthday's around Christmas right after, and they're traveling every year. And we literally have had some solar return charts that we have figured she's been in midair flying across the country from Arizona back to South Dakota where she lives or where her parents are. So you can get into quite a little bit of detail work sometimes for solar return charts if people are just naturally traveling on their birthday due to holidays or something like that. So hope I answered that question good enough. And as we said with these transits here, and I showed you a little bit on this person's chart, as you, and again, this is not her solar return chart. This is a bi-wheel with the transits for today. All right. And so if you want me to look at anything else in this chart for your interpretation, I can. My point is to just give you an overview of forecasting. Before I move on, questions with transits that I maybe didn't touch upon or remember?
Any questions on these transits or solar return issues for Kim? Looks pretty quiet, Kim.
All right. Major progressions. They are also known as major or secondary progressions, either one. And a lot of time you'll just hear people say progressions. There's more than one type of progressions, and we're going to look at two of the major types of progressions. But most of the time when somebody says progressions, they mean major or secondary progressions. They're known as a day for a year. And what we mean by that is we will take each planet, each natal chart planet, and move it one day's movement forward for each year of your life. Now, because the sun moves a degree a day, it'll move a degree a year. Because the moon moves anywhere from 13 to 15 degrees in a year, in a day, excuse me, in Major progressions, the moon will move 13 to 15 degrees in a year. Same thing with the planets. Whatever their mean motion is, or whatever their movement is on a daily basis, that gets extrapolated into a year when it's major progressions. Now, comparatively, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the nodes of the moon, or the inner planets and the nodes, they have a tendency to move faster. If you look at them, they all move, sometimes multiple degrees in a day. So they'll end up moving multiple degrees in a year. Now, the nodes don't move a degree a day, but they do move faster compared to the outer planets. When you work with major progressions and you look at Jupiter through Pluto, they move so slow comparatively day by day that they move very, very slow in major progressions. So they have fewer aspects because they move so slowly. Now, with major progressions, you can find that these progressed planets will turn retrograde, and if you were born with them natally retrograde, they will turn direct by progression as well. Now, one of the reasons why I like hit lists, and again, I'll show you what those are, is because it'll give me exact dates on when a planet is turning stationary retrograde or stationary direct by progression. So again, just to review, major progressions or secondary progressions are known as a day for a year. Every year of your life, the planet's natural daily movement is moved one day forward. And of course, then by progression, if a planet is slowing down, if you were born and when you were born, a natal planet was slowing down in the sky to turn retrograde, or slowing down to turn direct again, that slowing down movement will be reflected in the progressions for several years from your birth point. Clear on that? In other words, as the planet's movements speed up and slow down with retrogrades, that speed up, slow down will be reflected in progressions as well. So here is a look at this same chart, female chart. And again, I did secondary progressions for today as well. So for instance, if you want to look at this chart, you can see Jupiter was retrograde when she was born. And somewhere along the last 51 years, Jupiter went direct, and it has now moved to 12 degrees Aries. But that's still a very, very slow movement from 9.5 to 12.5 degrees in 51 years. You can come over here and look at natal Uranus and Pluto at almost 10 and 14 degrees Virgo, and look what's happened by progression. Somewhere in the last 51 years, they have both went retrograde because they're retrograde here by progression. So Pluto is barely reversed, okay? If you look at this right here, Pluto is barely moved off of itself. Just because I've worked with this for so long and looking at this, being less than half a degree, 10 minutes away, this is telling me that most likely somewhere halfway along those 51 years, so somewhere between 25 and 30, Pluto slowed down enough and it went stationary retrograde. You can look it up with hit list to get the exact date. Same thing with with Uranus right here. 954 Virgo natally. And as of right now today, by progression, 936 retrograde. So that same thing, these two planets went retrograde about half of her life ago. You can look around and see all of the slower planets are pretty close together to where they were. Now, when you move to the inner planets, you see them moving faster. And you can see Mercury actually turn retrograde and go direct again by progression. You can see that Mars has moved from 24 Sag to 3 degrees Aquarius, Venus from 27 Sag to 0 degrees Pisces. So these inner planets have moved quite a ways around. By major progression, you maybe have heard this term. It takes Saturn by transit, okay? And this is progressed Saturn. But Saturn by transit takes about 28.5 years, 29 years to go around the chart. The moon by progression takes about 27, 28 years to go around the chart. So when you have a Saturn return, usually somewhere just before it, you have a progressed lunar return. The moon, progressed moon, will go around the chart every 27, 28 years, because again, moon goes around that chart once a month. And so we can have usually 2, sometimes 3 progressed lunar returns that will take place. So watching the progressed moon is also another good emotional maturation or evolution factor to take into consideration when you are working with forecasting. And it will show you how a secondary vibration to that natal moon is taking place. If we look, for example, at this chart, remember that moon, that square the nodes, and so this back and forth energy between needing to be in control, emotional maturity, sometimes over responsibility, and emotional neediness. There's a lot of emotional catch up for this soul right here with moon square the nodes. And yet, if you look at this progressed moon that is over here at 26 Aquarius and its new phase to not only progressed Saturn, but new phase to natal Saturn. There's a lot. This here is another signature for the emotional maturation that the soul is going through, and also for being able to do that Aquarian thing and sometimes step back, emotionally detach, and be able to take a deeper, broader picture on this natal emotional energy and feistiness that's all over the place right here. Is this clear? Using this as an example of major progressions. Is there questions on this? Again, it's not my point to go into an in-depth chart interpretation, but as you're looking at this bi-wheel of progressions and how they are showing the soul's evolution compared to the natal chart. Questions with anything that I've not addressed?
Robin, I saw your hand raised. Are you there?
I am.
Hi, Robin.
Hello, Kim. Quick question, and generically speaking, I understand you don't want to go into interpretation, but I was always curious about this with progressions, and I'm going to use her Mercury-Mars as an example. So she's got Mercury in a balsamic phase to Mars natally. However, by progression, it's obvious now that she is in a last quarter sextile. So I guess what I'm trying to understand generically, again, is All right, so natally we have a certain signature. So that's going to be with us our entire life. But by
Mm-hmm.
progression, I'm looking at it like, okay, it's like a seed and it's sprouting and growing and changing. So I'm just curious if you could address what kind of changes occur through the progression and how it relates back to our natal signature. Does
Sure.
that make sense? Okay.
I think I'm understanding what you're asking, but you were using Mercury Mars as an example, so let me do
Yeah.
that. And it's okay to go in, into interpretation, uh, let's say bits and pieces, but we don't have the time for the whole chart. Now, if you look at Mercury Mars as a planetary pair, it is the mind and how it acts upon what it desires, and how our mental processing affects our desired nature. And so, with Mercury being in that balsamic phase to Mars natally, what this is there has to be a reflection, balsamic phase, balsamic conjunction, as a matter of fact, by 8 degrees. There has to be some mental reflection upon the actions. This is meant to slow down the impulsiveness of Mars. Mars, Sag, third house, of course, sign opposite house. There can be you know how excitable Sag energy can be, and it can get really stirred up in the third house. So she can sometimes have very, very wild emotion, wild actions, impulsive actions here, or sometimes just over the top actions. And so Mercury in Sag can feed into that by the Sag nature, but Mercury second house and Mercury balsamic Mars, there is wait a minute, let me stop and think about this. Is this really what I want to do? So that's kind of how Mercury Mars will relate to itself natally. Just in a tidbit, okay, snapshot of that. But now if we look at progressed Mercury, it's moved new phase to Mars. So Mercury by progression to Mars is having to consider new thinking, new ways of looking at things, new thought processes. And we've changed both houses and signs. So Mercury's in Capricorn, that adds a little, let's be practical. It tones down that natal Mercury in Sag, and it wants more mm, practical, direct, what makes sense thinking. And yet, it's in the third house, so it's got to open up to different ways of looking at things. Distortion, it could fly into the third house reactionism that will come from third house Gemini. Capricorn can temper that a little bit. It can help Mercury say, all right, this is what I think. And Capricorn can help that third house make choices in its processing. Then that's going to have an effect on that natal Mars. And because it's now new phase and we have to initiate new thinking, we have to initiate new ways of acting upon thinking, new thinking. All right. And so this Mercury, progressed Mercury to Mars, is going to say, I might have to do things differently than I have before. It's been quite a shock and adjustment for this Sag person who, again, if you see this much Sag, they love their freedom. They love freedom of movement. And she has literally now been confined to her home. She can move, she can still drive a car, but she can, I mean, it's like an all-day ordeal for her to go to the grocery store once a week on her own, driving her car. She literally has to have someone come in and clean her house. So all of that freedom of movement that she used to have, she's really having to look at it much differently and really focus her steps. And Mars rules muscles, by the way, and she has a muscle disease. So this is an interesting situation to look at from health and wellness for her. One of the things that I told her is that you may not have all that freedom of movement in the outer world that you used to have, but it is almost toning down some of your wildness, some of that second stage individuated that gets so rebellious, not able to hold jobs or relationships for very long. And I says, you're really having to look at your inner movements and how you are evolving things with your mental capacities, with your abilities. And I'm going to sidetrack now. This is leading me back to this Jupiter square the nodes, with really being able to have an assimilation of information, beliefs, experiences in your life, taking the time to assimilate things rather than just getting wild and angry at all your family members and everybody fighting back and forth, which is a pattern within her family of origin. And it's getting rocked right now with these. She said to me in her session that she didn't really grieve her mother's death, but her sister passing away last week, she says, I realized that my sister was the one who mothered me. This is an older sister who really was her mother. And so I'm saying, well, then you have had a 1-2-step grief process with your mother passing on, so to speak. And how is this affecting you? And so this Mercury, Mars, even though she can't always initiate the new actions, she's trying to. She's still attempting to get some of this muscle effort back. But she's also really having to open her mind up differently. Not only that, Mercury is approaching natal south node 11 degrees Capricorn. That's in the third house. Mercury is the ruler of this south node by house. So she's really having to come to terms with how many lifetimes she has just had to be absolutely in control, South Node Cap, or just going off the just off the charts in her verbosity when she wasn't in control. And again, this is the square with Moon Jupiter that's in this picture as well. So I hope that's giving an example for all of you, and we could do this with every single planetary pair around this chart. You go to the natal planetary pair, you look at its phasal relationship, you add in house sign, you can add in aspects, all right? And then you can see that this Mercury is in a T-square to Chiron, Uranus, Pluto. She's really had to look at any sense of victimization that she's had and trauma, her own trauma that she's come through with lifetimes that Uranus, balsamic Pluto is trying to bring to resolution, and by progression is trying to throw it off, meaning make it conscious. And I've told, and one of the things I said in our session last week, I says, you really, now that you're finally getting past this transiting Pluto on the south node, Uranus on Jupiter, and then the moon, I says, you really want to be reflecting over what all of these health issues and family issues has meant on deeper levels. Again, I'm just telling her, looking at the transiting aspects. I'm wandering here, but just looking at those transiting aspects, I'm saying a practical thing for her. Ask yourself, what does it mean for me that I'm losing my family members, I'm losing my mobility, my whole life has changed? How do I incorporate that? How do I assimilate that? What does it mean for me? Jupiter square the nodes. You can also have it with the ruler Mercury going balsamic here. We can also have it with Mercury being new phase to Mars, just looking at progressed Mercury with some of its aspects and how some of the natal aspects it's starting to all blend together, and eventually what you end up doing as an astrologer, you see repeating themes. So then you can just raise practical questions to the client. And I've jump-started her, encouraged her, just ask those questions inwardly on what do these changes mean in my life. And I says, one of the things you might be wanting to go for is the inner peace of third stage individuated. She knows enough of evolutionary astrology that she's familiar with evolutionary states and has studied some of this astrology on her own. Okay, I wandered a little bit, but hopefully I'm answering some questions okay for everybody. Other questions in regards to major progressions before I move on?
Kim, you did state that for a solar return, it's the current place in which the client resides. Is that also the case with major progressions, secondary progressions?
I do it with all of them. Now, you will find with progressions and solar arcs, it really doesn't change too much. But I do use current location, yes.
Thank you. That answered one question. Yep.
Okay, moving on. Minor progressions. I don't use these a lot, but I just wanted to include them so that you know by definition the difference. Minor progressions are also known as tertiary progressions. Tertiary is lunar. So lunar progressions. And this is a day for a month. Remember, major progressions were a day for a year. Minor progressions are a day for a month, and that means each planet moves one day's movement forward for each month of life. So this really speeds up the natal planets. And so all the planets move faster in minor progressions than they do in major progressions. Now, because this is based upon a day for a month, many times lunar progressions are used to track emotional evolution, to see how we are evolving emotionally. Minor progressions still use planetary retrogrades just like major progressions do. Now, if you have the computerized interpretation charts, remember all of those? Way back in the day when I used to do psychic fairs, I used to print out forecast reports. And every so often I'd have somebody come to my booth and say, can you do lunar progressions? And I would literally do a printout in typically 6 months or a year. And we would look at all the lunar progressed aspects to the natal chart. And I don't know who wrote the program. It's been a long time ago. I don't remember. But again, the whole thing would be that you would put an emotional flavor to it. So here is the lunar progressions or tertiary progressions for the same chart. Now, just for instance, compare it to, look at Uranus and Pluto, who both came in at 9:54 Virgo, 14:7 Virgo. By tertiary progression, they have went retrograde and they've come back direct again. So you can see that the lunar progressed planets move quite fast. They move a lot faster than the major progressions do. As I said, I don't use these a lot. If it is something that you want to work with, you sure could, especially if you want to study the moon. You could make this something that I'd suggest working with your own chart, work with your family members' charts, become familiar with their charts first before I would say taking it out there and working with it. Interpretation-wise, I really don't have too much to say on this. I just wanted to explain it to you as example. Do you have any questions on it before I move on?
Hold on, Kim. Let's see if Peter is mic'd up. Peter, can you hear me? And do you have earbuds or a USB headset where you can respond?
Well, no, I had a question about the regular progress chart, but it's okay. Let's move on.
Do you want me to go back to it? It's fine, Peter. I can go back to it quite easily. This is the major progress chart. Was it a question on the chart or a question on the information?
On the chart.
Go ahead.
What I've normally read, and just to get a confirmation from you, is that really what you really want to look at in terms of major indicators when you're not really going deeply into the chart is basically the sun and the moon. They're the major indications. And what I noticed here, which was interesting, was that as a confirmation of the theme that you were discussing, was that the sun is on the cusp of the fourth house in Capricorn. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of confirming the need to engage in emotional responsibility, to learn to be emotionally responsible. So would you say that both sun and moon really, like if you just want to look at the gist of the progress chart, those are the most important?
You can, yes, you can. I will show you when I get to the hit lists that I many times will just be working with whatever progressed aspect is showing up on the horizon as well. And again, when you're looking at these charts visually, and there are a lot of practicing astrologers who prefer the visual. I do too, but I don't draw up the chart. I draw up the hit list and I handwrite it in visually. And something about that process of handwriting it in allows it to sink in for me and get more value and meaning out of the current forecasting that I'm looking at.
Okay.
And so, yes, you can use sun and moon, all right, but you can use anything that seems to be becoming active by progression. The same way I'll use anything that's becoming active by solar arc as well. When I could have backed up and said this at the beginning. When I do forecasting, I use transits, Jupiter through Pluto, and the nodes. I use every planet by major progression, and I use every planet by solar arc. And I will draw up a list for 3 years. And then I will see via those 3 different methods, transits, progressions, solar arcs, are there repeating themes? What seems to be the most active? For instance, if somebody has by progression and solar arcs, 4 or 5 different Mercury aspects or Mars aspects that come up, then I'll tune in on that and I'll talk about that. So I'm guided more by what is most active. And again, if you'll bear with me, I'm showing visuals here with bi-wheels, but we're going to get to a quad wheel, and then I'm going to get to the hit list, and I'm going to show you how I do my hit list in Solar Fire and WindStar. All right?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so again, I just wanted to show you the difference with minor progressions and how they do operate math-wise. Solar arcs are known as a degree for a year. Remember major progressions, a day for a year. Solar arcs, a degree for a year. Each planet moves 1 degree movement forward for each year of life. Solar sun arc movement. Now it so happens that the major progressed sun and solar arc sun are always identical, because in major progressions, a day for a year, the sun moves a degree a day, degree a year. Solar arcs, a degree for a year. Sun moves a degree a day, a degree a year. So solar arc sun and major progressed sun are identical. Now what happens in solar arcs is because it's a degree for a year, every planet takes 30 years to move through a sign of the zodiac. Or depending on how many degrees of a house there are, anywhere from 25 to 35 years to move through one house because it's a degree a year. So what happens is the inner planets slow down compared to progressions, where major progressed moon moves 13 to 15 degrees in a year. Solar arc moon only moves 1 degree in a year. So in solar arcs, the inner planets are slowed down and the outer planets are speeded up. And the other thing about solar arc is there's no stationary retrogrades and directs. All the planets are moved 1 degree forward. And I'll have something to say on the nodes about this here in another slide as well. Now, this is reminding me of something else that sometimes in more traditional astrology, there have been those that say, for instance, progressions are inner development and solar arcs are outer events. In my opinion, that's hogwash. Doesn't matter how you come across it math-wise. Doesn't matter whether it's an actual transiting planet in the sky. Doesn't matter if it's a major progression or a solar arc. If it is Mercury square Pluto, the interpretation is going to be the same, whether it's a transit, a progression, or a solar arc. There may be some difference in the timing, in other words, how long that influence of that aspect lasts. If it's transiting Mercury, waxing square natal Pluto, Mercury's going to be in effect maybe a couple of days or a week. But if it's progressed or solar arc Mercury waxing square Pluto, they'll be in effect for probably at least 3 years. Solar arcs, I tend to say a 3-year influence, the degree before, the degree of, the degree after. I tend to do the same thing too with the progressions of those outer planets. Most of the time, you're transiting outer planets, progressions, major progressions, solar arcs, all have anywhere from a 1 to 3 year influence. But I don't differentiate interpretation by whether it's a solar arc or a progression. That is, it's trying to complicate astrology, and it's, usually trying to, sometimes it's astrologers making a stand out in the astrological world. This is what I'm going to be known as. But when we look at it from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, an archetype in consciousness is an archetype in consciousness. It has a spectrum of meaning to it, but it's still, Mercury is left brain, mind, communications. Mars is the instinctive initiation of the desired nature coming from Pluto. And so that is going to be there regardless of whether it's an aspect by solar arc or progression or transit. Clear? If not clear, I can let Leroy know, and I'll certainly be happy to explain that to you. Now, the natal planetary configuration in the chart stays the same. It's just that all the planets slide around the chart. And I'll give you the example with our female chart again. But the point is, with progressions, with major progressions, and the planets are moving at different speeds to each other, progressed planets will come into aspect with each other, and progressed planets will come into different aspects with the natal chart. But with solar returns, if you have Mercury square Pluto in solar arc, if you have Mercury square Pluto in the natal chart, and you look at solar arcs, Mercury will always be square Pluto. It'll move through signs, it'll move through houses, but that configuration will stay there. Now I want to say one more thing, and then again I'll show you the chart. You must be careful when you're working with progressions and solar arcs with the nodal axis. Most solar arc programs move the nodes forward instead of retrograde. Pet peeve of mine. In other words, we know that the mean motion of the nodes of the moon reverses or through the zodiac, moves backwards 90% of the time. And therefore, to me, solar arc nodes must be moved backwards a degree a year. Now, I don't see programs doing that, so you need to observe that. And I put progressions in there just in case you want to take a look at that. Most of the time I see the major progressions moving the nodes backwards. But I'm pointing it out that you want to be aware of this in case you have, a software program that doesn't take that into consideration. So here is the solar arc biwheel to the natal for this same female, solar arcs for today. Now, just glancing, she was born in 63. This is 2014. This woman is going to be turning 51 degrees. Degree for a year, solar arcs. Every planet is about 51 degrees from its natal planet. And as I said, remember right here in the natal chart, we have Moon, Jupiter square the nodes right here. Well, guess what? Here's Moon, Jupiter square the nodes in the solar arc chart. It just slid around the chart in a counterclockwise fashion. Now, for instance, though, this Moon-Jupiter conjunction can start to make aspects to other planets in the natal chart differently than what the natal Moon-Jupiter does. But the point is, the planetary configuration stays the same. In solar arcs, it just slides around the chart in a counterclockwise fashion. Now here's my pet peeve with the nodes of the moon. South node at 11 degrees Capricorn, it should move 51 degrees clockwise rather than moving forward. I have not seen this corrected in any of the major astrological software programs. So if you are going to work with solar arcs, many times you're going to have to count backwards by hand the 51 degrees to and pencil the nodes in where they are, and then see what aspects come out of that. You can see by solar arc, Neptune, because we've been kind of concentrating in this area right here. You can see by solar arc, Neptune's made it to 7 degrees Capricorn, and it's becoming balsamic to that south node. So not only is transiting Pluto here, we have solar arc Neptune really having her look at this emotional past and the inner peace, the calming down, the inner power versus outer control that needs to be going on here. This was another reason why I told her you really need to be searching for deeper meanings of why these events have happened in your life. And it's an inner process that you need to go through between you and yourself. Solar arc sun, same place as progressed sun. So the things that were said earlier about progressed sun moving in here, solar arc sun's right here as well. This major initiation of the last couple of years of not only the physical changes in home and family, but in that emotional maturation that her soul is really seeking to evolve into. With solar arcs, you see that we have 3 planets in Aquarius. We don't have that progressed, again, solar arc Saturn's moved 51 degrees beyond. We had that progressed Saturn here, remember? But Venus has just moved over it. Mars is coming to it. So there can be a lot of emotional detachment and maturation that's going on right here. as well. I'm not going to go big into interpretation here for the sake of time. Again, I'm trying to show you math and basic considerations. Any questions on this before I move forward?
Robin, you had a couple of observations or questions for Kim?
Yeah, I just had a question, Kim, and if you don't feel that now's the time you'd want to answer it, but just, since the bottom line is Pluto, I mean, for every other planet in our chart, that's it, the desires of the soul and how we can evolve and serve those desires, exhausting new desires constantly. What's confusing, though, is that what would you say about natal Pluto going retrograde by progression? That kind of seems confusing. And it's also changing houses. Obviously, it's very significant, but I'm just wondering, in other words, so retrograde, we're throwing off, we're liberating, it's got that Uranian kind of quality to it, but I guess, would that sort of indicate then that the current life desires are no longer working for the soul, and the soul is kind of in a search? Because I mean, it's going to be for the rest of the life in this case. So I'm just wondering if you could just make a brief comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, I sure can. Let me do this though. Let me move us forward here. Quad wheels. There are a lot of astrologers that like to use quad wheels, and I'm going to show you one. But what we have with a quad wheel is 4 different types of charts, the ones we've been just talking about here, and we look and observe them all at the same time. And again, most commonly used, natal chart, transits, major progressions, and solar arcs. So here is the quad wheel of this female. The inner chart, innermost wheel right here, remember she was the 11th house Pluto, and we had the moon, Jupiter square the nodes. The second chart is the transits. Okay, this middle inner wheel is the current transits for today. Then the middle outer wheel is the secondary progressions, and that's all of this right here. And finally, the outermost wheel is the solar arcs, and that's this right here. So you can do a visual like this, in which you can be looking at that natal chart, and you can see the impact or opportunity for any soul via transits, progressions, and solar arcs. Now that's a lot to take into consideration. What you would want to look for is repeating themes, but to answer some of the questions that Robin brought up many times, because again, like she said, in evolutionary astrology, we look so much on the soul and its ego, which is Pluto, and the nodal axes, sign, house, aspects, etc. If you look at here, this natal chart right here, can you see right off the bat with this female chart? Pluto, 11th house, Aquarius soul. Uranus, ruler of the 11th house, balsamic Pluto. In Virgo, here's trauma. We know that right off the bat that we've just got trauma going on here when we see planets in Aquarius or the 11th house or in strong aspect to Uranus. And so, this is something then that you are going to do all of the Pluto things that we talk about with Aquarian souls, which is, what are you doing to heal trauma in your life? Many times what you'll find with Aquarian souls is because Uranus rules the brain and the individuated unconsciousness, you will find that Aquarian souls will have spontaneous memories of past lives. That has been true for this female. They will also have spontaneous insights of the future, those snapshots of the future going forward. That has been the case for this soul as well. So you would work with them in a counseling fashion on what have been the spontaneous memories that you have brought up. I'll give you one example. This female told me she had a memory of when I was a male, she was a female, I was her brother. I moved west. Guess where I was? Black Hills, South Dakota. And encouraged her as a female to come west. It was back in the gold rush days. When she got there, I had been killed. I was no longer there. She was abandoned. She had no other family members. See how this also fits in with Moon Jupiter square the nodes and the skip steps with karma and family and everything. And so it's been in many ways very healing for her and I. It's more her as her astrologer. I've been there helping her understand things and make sense of her life and help her feel that she's not so traumatized and abandoned anymore. You see this with the nodal axes, Pluto and the nodes going on here. And I hadn't spoken to her for a while here, and so we had some really good conversations over the last week in addition to an astrologer client session, and it just felt good to talk to her again from my perspective, and it felt good to hear the healing that she's been in process of doing even through these painful moments. So we know that we have, again, trauma within the nature of the soul. And looking at the nodal axis here, this is a soul who bounces back and forth between being in charge, having to be responsible. Many times she's been the mediator in this family. She's the most evolved one in this family of 2 boys, 2 girls, and now she's the only female left. And then bouncing over here, just being very emotionally wild, crazy. She's done some interesting things in her life, and this emotional boomerang back and forth of what she's done. And the resolution node being the south node and going back to the past and looking at it, healing it, having some type of maturation factor there. Capricorn. And so in regards to what you have said, looking at this natal Pluto imprint then, it's very easy to then go to progressed Pluto Uranus. They will have not moved very far along. Now, what we can't see looking at this visually in the quad wheel, well, okay, excuse me, I'll take that back. Solar fire. I'm looking for the R. Solar fire turns it red. When you see the degrees in red in solar fire, that means they're retrograde by progression. All right. And so, but looking at these 2 retrograde planets, just in general, again, remember retrogrades, review, reevaluate, but throw off. Something was either not learned, resolved, assimilated in the past, and you're here to repeat it again. Or the other retrograde factor is you've taken in too much of that archetype and you've got to throw off the conditioning factors to that archetype so that planetary archetype can arrive at the essence of who you really are with that archetype. And so there's a lot of retrograde here. There's a lot of throwing off and liberation from this traumatic past that this soul is in process of doing. Now, it doesn't mean that trauma won't happen again. It's a retrograde in the 11th house, and Uranus is still balsamic Pluto, even by progression. But there can be a broadening of the understanding, that Aquarian detachment, looking from that outside of self at that larger picture of your role. That can be an evolved response via progression to how the soul then looks at trauma happening again. And so what I've observed in this female is she still can go off the deep end emotionally, Aries moon, but she's finding her equilibrium a little faster and a little faster. And especially through these major traumatic experiences with her health and having to go fully disabled. And this is a person who loved to work. and then losing these family members. There's been, transiting Uranus Pluto has been pretty heavy on her. And yet she again is reaching towards finding that equilibrium faster and trying to detach and say, why is this happening? Why am I re-experiencing traumas again? Now, the other way, the next thing to me that you could look at is, what does transiting Uranus bring into the picture? Because this is also going to be the evolution of the soul. Progressed Pluto, transiting Pluto, solar arc Pluto, together as a triune, will represent the evolution of this soul in this life. Now you can repeat that with every planet. Natal moon, you can go to the progressed moon, which is, transiting moon, moves awful fast, but it's there. It's there. Just look at all the emotions you go through in a day. You can look at transiting moon. You can look at progressed moon, and you can look at solar arc moon. All of those as a triune will describe the evolution of the natal emotional signature. Whoops, sorry about that. So every planetary archetype is going to work that way. The transit, the progression, and the solar arc of any archetype will have an impact on the natal. Now, to go back to this one here with the natal 11th house Pluto, the Aquarian soul, looking at transiting Pluto here in Capricorn. We know transiting Pluto moves slow. She's only going to have 3 hits over the south node. She's had 2. I think she's going to have the 3rd one here within the next couple of weeks. So happens in this month, we've got this Mars transit right here as well. So this is some initiation within the desire nature of the soul. And when I see Pluto moving through the 3rd house, I'm always saying, how is your soul opening up to the world? How are you learning to be more flexible in your environment? Now that becomes very relative to this Pluto Capricorn 3rd, relative to this fixed air Pluto signature. Aquarian souls, they are fixed air. And after you do so many charts and you see those 11th house Plutos come in, the little joke is, well, first of all, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, and then we're going to do it. Yeah, they're not always spontaneous. If that Pluto was in Aries or a fire sign, yeah, it might bleed something into that. But when you have fixed house Plutos, as you know, they are not real fast about changing themselves. And when something comes along and changes real suddenly for an Aquarian soul, they're mentally traumatized. Their brain will freeze up. And sometimes you go, breathe. So transiting Pluto in Capricorn is having an effect in maturing, what's real. Really, all of us with Pluto and Capricorn, look at how we're all having to internalize how the outer world is not working anymore, and we go within to see what has to change within the soul to then go back out, Capricorn, and change that outer world. She's in process of doing that, but she also has this Pluto Capricorn transit going on in the 3rd house. So what I said a moment ago, how are you opening up to your environment? How are you learning to be flexible? How are you working to consciously see things differently than before? So can you see how her transiting Pluto is adding on to progressed Pluto, shaking off the past, detaching, seeing a deeper, broader viewpoint? Add in solar arc Pluto. Here's a 3rd component that is affecting the evolution of the natal dynamics within this soul. Solar arc, Uranus, Pluto are going to have the same relationship, same configuration that they have natally, because they're both a degree for a year. So Uranus is still balsamic Pluto here, okay? Look at transiting Uranus, as we all know, the square right there. I won't discuss that. But this one is Scorpio first house. And it's been there for a while. So you could go many directions here. You could take the physical body into consideration with this as well. You also have this, at the moment, transiting Mercury going through this. That's pretty fast. But sometimes when we see this in the snapshot, and she just had a session with me, so it had some impact in hearing, Mercury, what I was saying to her. This is new beginnings. This is the soul starting over. Again, it's happened a few years ago, 10 years ago with Uranus. It's been about 15 years since solar arc Pluto went into the first house, because it's 15 degrees beyond the ascendant, so 15 years, okay? But it's in Scorpio. And so here is going emotionally deep within self to see what we want to evolve, do differently in regards to soul initiations, first house, in regards to emotional initiations, Scorpio first house. This is going to then impact right here, okay, and going, wait a minute, I don't have to do it like I used to. I can shift, I can change. I can go to those deeper understandings in addition to broader detachment. So between these three different Plutos, they're all here on the Eastern Hemisphere, as we call it. When you go from the 10th house to the 4th house, get my mouse to work. This is the Eastern Hemisphere. This is Self. When you go from the 4th house to the 10th house, this is Western Hemisphere, this is others. So all three Plutos are still here in the Eastern Hemisphere. Major emphasis on self. One's above the horizon, outer world. Two are below the horizon, inner world. So there is a strong emphasis on inner soul work here because of Eastern Hemisphere and below the horizon with first house, third house Plutos. So again, just snapshots for you, but I think that maybe will have answered Robin's question. And to repeat, you can take any archetype. You can go to the sun, you can go to Venus and see how all three Venuses impact on the natal Venus signature. All right, this makes sense? Questions with what I'm raising before we move on and I show you how to do hit lists?
Okay, Robin, go ahead.
Kim, it's Robin again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just one last question. I'm still not, I got what you said about the triune, but I'm just still not completely clear on what the retrograde process might or might not indicate. I know normally it would be like a speeding up process. So is her soul, and I know you're taking the triune as well, but is her soul, is the retrograde showing an effort of the soul to really get down and get dirty, so to speak?
Yes,
I'm
yes.
not really clear. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And let me answer the question more generically. When you see a natal planet direct, and by progression the planet goes retrograde, it means within this lifetime that planetary archetype has become saturated with conditionings. And the retrograde by progression emphasizes throwing off the conditionings that you've had in this life up to that point of the retrograde, and also throwing off the conditionings of that archetype from past life as well.
Got
The
it.
opposite, yeah, the opposite of that. You're born with a natal planet retrograde, and by progression it goes direct. It means you came in this lifetime ready and willing to throw off all conditioning factors of that natal planetary retrograde. And when it goes direct by progression, you are ready to move forward with that archetype and evolve it again. So it flip-flops.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, honey. No worries. Let me just check in. Other questions before I move on, Leroy, or comments, anything? And
Peter, did you have a question of Kim?
Kim,
Mhm.
how did you determine that this person was, I think it was first
second
stage?
stage individuated.
Now, why isn't she, because you said, you mentioned her interest in Wicca. Now, what makes you determine that she's not, let's say, first stage spirituated? Because it seems like from what you're saying, this is a person, the fact that she's interested in astrology, the fact that she's so connected with you. I mean, I see this person as someone with intense spiritual longing, no?
Okay, here it is in a nutshell. I employed her for 10 years. We worked very intimately together for 10 years. And so the chart will not tell you gender, the chart will not tell you evolutionary state. Because I was able to work with her on such an intimate level, she was my astrological assistant for 10 years until 2008. So she was immersed in astrology through working through me. And through many conversations, we both came to the understanding, second stage individuated. That rebellious factor is so strong within her. What I had in conversation with her in the last week is that I think the greater message of the Uranus-Pluto square and how it has been impacting her chart is really offering it up for her to move into third stage individuated and finding that inner peace that comes from third individuated. And I said, not only that, I think you can tip your toe into first spirituated by nature of the fact of what you know through evolutionary astrology and all of your spiritual teachings and studies that you've done over the years. So in answer to your question, it is observe, correlate, observe, correlate. And it is something that we as astrologers become more proficient at with practice.
Right. Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Without going into detail, there are some things about her that have just been so rebellious. And when she found EA and recognized that it was her, own fears of being drawn back into consensus, especially the heavy conditioning by her parents when she was younger, she wears her second individuated like a badge of honor. And I said, but aren't you tired of the rebellion? Can you not sink into that inner peace of knowing that you're okay and you're unique and this and source energy will take care of you somehow, some way? You want, here's look at this Neptune right here, okay, with the progressed south node transiting Pluto, Mercury, all of this right here. I say, aren't you tired of running hot and wild and reactionary? And this is the resolution node to the moon, Jupiter square the nodes. I says, you really want to be searching for inner peace, whether it is being able to rely on source, which is first spirituated, or recognizing that you can rely on yourself, which is the third individuated. And you can have source energy third individuated as well, but it's more from the ego third individuated. It's more of a transference from ego to soul when we move to first spirituated. And so this is what I invited her to do, looking at this right here. Ooh, excuse my burp. All right, I'm going to move us along just because of time-wise, because I want to talk about hit lists. This is where we have a listing of aspects by transits, progressions, and/or solar arcs. You can do a hit list on transits. You can do a hit list on just progressions over 50 years of times. Solar arcs, a hit list, 50 years of time. As I told you, my hit list that I like to draw up is Jupiter through Pluto and the nodes transits, all archetypes by progression, and all archetypes by solar arcs. Now, many times hit list will you have a choice to use enter, exact, and leave, and that's just like they sound. Enter means it's applying to the exact aspect and it's entering an orb of influence. Exact is exact. Leave means it's separating and it's leaving the orb of influence. Usually your software allows you to define the orbs. The default with progressions and solar arcs is usually 1 orb 1 degree before for entering, 1 degree after for leaving. Now I have a tendency to just draw up an exact list. I'm going to show you some example right here, and then I'm going to show you how I find it. This is for the person in question, this female. If you're looking right here, you see Moon square Neptune. Here's the date. This is point 1 Moon, and this is point 1 progression. So Moon is squaring, and we look at Aquarius to Scorpio. Moon is a first quarter square to natal Neptune. This is point 2. This is point 2 natal. These are all the progressed Moon hits to the natal chart. And sometimes when you see the hit list like this, both the visual and the hit lists work. And I like to use both because then you can see what the Moon is doing as it comes up, and you can get some timing of that when it comes up. Now here's the second page of our hit list. We move beyond the Moon. I have a tendency to put them in planetary order rather than date order because I want to look at what Mercury's doing. And these Mercury aspects are all solar arcs to natal. Venus has 1 progression. Mars, we have a mixture of solar arc and progressed Mars to the natal chart. And then I start moving into the Jupiter transits. And so this is the list, but here's what I want to do. I just briefly want to show you how you can find these in your software. And so at this point, I am going to be leaving, I'm going to get out of PowerPoint, and I'm going to, this is my niece, Macy Quinn, Kimmy's favorite little niece at the moment, although I have 2 of them and they're both my favorite. So here we are in Solar Fire, and I have the natal chart for this woman drawn up. Okay, the same chart we've been looking at, 11th house Pluto, Moon, Jupiter square the nodes. When you want to do a hit list here in Solar Fire, you go to Dynamic menu, and you go to Transits and Progressions, and it opens up a whole way of looking at things. Now, you can choose to do these lists to the natal chart or to relocate it. Both happen to be the same for this person. Radix is another term for natal. All right, and you can see here you've got a lot of choices of what you can choose to draw up here. It automatically is bringing up transits to the natal chart. I'm going to add on progressions to the natal chart. You can go in here and choose how you're going to, what planets you're going to use. For instance, if I click on this, I click on planets, I want to edit. You see I have everything listed, including Chiron and the nodes. I don't have the south node. I'm going to put the south node in there. I like to list both north node and south node because they make, you know, corresponding aspects from an opposite perspective. So I changed that a little bit, and I selected that. I'm also going to do directions. Now, I could not find in here where it showed me how I could change what I use in solar arc directions. They're sometimes called directions, solar arcs. I couldn't figure out in here where I could choose the sun, the moon, the planets, and the different planets. I couldn't find that. So I'm sorry about that. I don't consider myself an expert in solar fire. I've used WinStar for 30 years. But if we then put this into view, and we've done the list, I think the default was a year. So I have it sorted by planets, okay? So here's the moon, all right? This is, I gotta click on this so it's not there. This is solar arc's term for secondary progressions to the natal, okay? Here's position 1, the moving planet, secondary progressed moon. Position 2 is the natal. And over here, position 1 degree in the zodiac, position 2. And again, solar fire will always be in red when it's retrograde. And so you can do it this way. Now, sort by point 1, okay? I sorted it by the planet. You can sort by date, time. And here you see I have my list for October. I have transiting Jupiter, making a square to, that's that square to Neptune. You can see that we have progressed moon making a semi-square to Jupiter. Here's Uranus making that conjunction to the moon. Here's Uranus to natal Pluto. So you can have your choice of whether you like to list it by date, time. Some people like to just do that type of a list. And in this case, then Solar Fire puts it there month by month. As I said, I have a personal thing and liking to list it by the moving planet. So I draw up the moon and I get every hit by progression and solar arc. There are no solar arcs hits for the moon. And then Mercury, Mars, you see that nothing's in here. I think I did a 1-year time period. There'd be a lot more if it was a 3-year list. But you can see then right here, Uranus, Pluto, Chiron, and the nodal axes. Now, because, let's see, I got a nodal ax solar arc here, I would ignore this because it moves it forward. I wouldn't consider it. But I do find that, again, in solar fire, the progressed nodal axis does go retrograde. So that's how you do that hit list in solar fire. Is this clear for everybody? Do you want me to do it again?
Seems okay, Kim. You covered a lot there.
Okay, so that's how you do a hit list in solar fire. Let me show you the same hit list in WinStar. I started with WinStar when it was Blue Star, and it was a DOS environment, believe it or not. I might have to move this over. Whoops. I think I can still hit the buttons. Here's the same natal chart, okay? And here's that famous 30-degree dial that I talk about. So when some planet's traveling, Pluto 15 degrees, 11 to 12, 13, 14 degrees Capricorn, at a glance I can tell these are the natal planets Pluto's going to be aspecting. All right? And then, of course, the grids that I think many of us are familiar with. But in WinStar, they have a search function. And you can customize these. And I have a customized one for 3 years. Okay? And so all I have to do is hit that button, and it gives me my hit list. And it gives me the hit list in date order. Okay? And so I have it set, defaulted for the first of the year, whatever the year is that I'm working of the 3. So you can look at all of this. Here's transit to natal, progress to natal. I like to change my layout, and so I sort it by planet's time. So I've got the same hit list that I had in solar fire. There's a lot more fields that you can have in here. I just have simplified it. I don't need a bunch of extra stuff, so I have it very simplified for me because I print this out and refer to this list in addition to looking at a natal chart or a bi-wheel or a quad wheel. I like this list to give me some specific timing as well. And as you can see, you can go through Jupiter, and when you start to, like here was Mars again with 3 solar arcs and 1 progression in the next few years. And as you start moving down these outer planets, you can see that there's a lot of transits, but every so often you're going to have solar arc Saturn is going to conjunct natal Jupiter here. Okay, you can see as you move through the outer planets, you start to see a few solar arcs. Once in a while, you'll see a progression. But you can see outer planets, there's more transits and solar arcs than there are progressions. You're working with the inner planets, there's more progressions and sometimes a few solar arcs. So you can see that. Now, again, in just to show, whoops, not that one. Re-enter search, I think it's this one. Yeah. This is in solar or wind star. This is how theirs looks. When you're doing transit to natal, you can choose the planets. You can choose the aspect set. I haven't spoke about this. Ptolemy is the most common used aspect set. Phew, all those words. And it doesn't include semi-squares and sesquisquadrates. And as we've just come off of a 5-class series on the cycle of phases and aspects, and you've all been recognizing how important it is to include semi-squares and sesquisquadrates, that's something to consider in your aspect set. Standard, okay, is the one that will automatically include a lot more of your minor aspects. And these are pretty standard definitions in various software programs. But you can just see from my solar arc to natals, I got every planet to the natal, and I'm using all the little aspects. With the progression planets, I divide it up. Because I can get too many aspects going with inner progressions, I leave this one Ptolemy. And of course, with my transits, I'm only using the outer planets, Jupiter through Pluto with the nodes and chirons in there. I do use all of the minor aspects in there with those. But you can easily move in and change that. For instance, the natal here, I can go in and edit, and I can choose a different aspect set. I can look for just conjunctions, oppositions, hard aspects, soft aspects, customize. There's different things that you can look for with them. You choose a planet by clicking on it, not clicking on it. So there's different ways of doing that. One of the things that you always do in evolutionary astrology is work with the true node. But it's just 2 different programs, the same hit list. I've went in and programmed them both to give me, or at least in this case, to give me a 3 years at a time. What is progressed moon doing for the next 3 years? There's no solar arc moon. So I use these hit lists and I literally print them out. And I use a natal chart, and I'll go around and I will handwrite those progressions, solar arcs, and major transits around the chart. And for me, it's just a personal thing. You might like to use a quad wheel visually better and forget a hit list. But for me, when I take this hit list and I write it into this natal chart around the edges, I'll use up a whole chart. I'll use all in here all over the place. But it's kind of like a mental processing for me, and I get a grasp of repeating themes via these planets that way. All right, that is what I wanted to show you. 2 minutes to spare. Woohoo! Do I have questions from anybody on what I just showed you with hit lists? Oh, I do have one more thing to show you. We talked about this last month. I put it in the PDF file if you reviewed the class from last month. I just wanted to mention it. Last month's class was a math review for the cycle of phases and aspects. And if you are new to our segment 1 classes, I would say you start with last month's class and then go back and go over what was it, April through July with the different cycles of phases and aspects. But an easy way to know when you have two planets that have either a semi-square 45, 315 or a sesquisquadrate aspect, which is 135, 225, an easy way to know that to each other is by being able to count in increments of 15 degrees. So if one planet is 0 and another one's 15, you know it's going to be a semi-square or a sesquisquadrate looking at it visually. Same thing with one planet's 1 degree and another planet's 16, or one planet's 2 degrees and another planet is 17. And you could make yourself a little cheat sheet if you wanted to, going from 0 to 30, as I have in this list. I did increments of 5 degrees, and I've learned how to just do the math in my head. If I'm 23 degrees, I'm 8 degrees. I've just done it enough years, so I've learned how. You could go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 30, and then go 15, 16, 17, 30, 0, 1, 2, 3 to 15. And you could have a little cheat sheet. And then that can help you with learning those 15-degree increments. That'll make it easier for you to spot out semi-squares and sesquisquadrates. Back in the day, I watched Jeffrey Green used to do that. He must have taught himself this one because he could look and just spot by the degrees when it was 15 degrees increments and it was either semi-square or sesquisquadrate. So that was just tucked into last month's class. I didn't have that slide, although I put it in after class, and I just wanted to take a moment to explain it to you. So I've covered all the material. Any final questions or comments? And next month we're going to look at all the different house systems.
Kim? I thought it might be good to get on the tape for the recording for this class to announce your mastering chart interpretation.
Yes.
February 6th through 8th of next year, 2015, we'll be down in Tampa Bay area doing a mastering chart interpretation with Kim Marie, probably covering many of the key things we talked about today, or several of them at least, in the context of a 3-day workshop. So.
How I have been looking at it is, and I will have this in tomorrow's podcast email for everybody, and so I should have slides for tomorrow night's public class if you're attending that one. But I'm looking at a Friday evening to just do a little review on planetary method of chart interpretation, Pluto and the nodes, and then we'll take 2 full days, Saturday and Sunday, and just work with charts. For whoever attends, you can offer up various charts, and we'll just work with chart interpretation, because that's always the biggie that we're always trying to master. So I will get all the details done. Was going to have it last week, and does anybody notice it was a full moon? And man, it was smack dab on my midheaven nadir, and I just had a bunch of stuff come up. I get to live through it just like the rest of you. So yes, we'll have those details, but the dates are February 6th, 7th, 8th, Tampa Bay. And much thanks to Robin, who has been on these classes, because they will be through her home, and I really appreciate that opportunity. So final comments or questions on any of material from today? Otherwise, we'll let you go. I do have to change some slides. We finally let the 877 the toll-free number went, everybody. Too many cell phones. Nobody needs a toll-free number anymore.
A final question from Peter. Do you have your hand raised,
Go
Peter?
ahead.
Kim, I remember once in one of your videos you talked about one of the most auspicious times for a transiting retrograde planet is when it goes stationary direct. And my understanding is that Neptune is just ready to go stationary direct. Is that right?
Yes, it is. You are so correct. Neptune is going to go stationary direct this weekend. So it is excellent time period to really be coming to terms with your next spiritual step forward. And the other thing about it is Chiron, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Chiron goes stationary direct November 24th or 25th. It's just, a little bit, they're still traveling in tandem together. And so Chiron and Neptune both in Pisces, we're all looking at any sense of victimization and the opportunity to heal it, address it, move beyond it, and turn that sense of feeling the victim into an empowerment. I am co-creator with source of my world. And so with both of those planets turning, I was going to speak on that in the podcast this week, those two planets turning stationary direct, yes, powerful times for those spiritual aha moments and to really feel reconnected to source energy. All right, everybody, anything else?
Oh, thank you, Kim.
If not, thank you very much for attending live. Yep, and thank you to all